You are now listening to Rants, Real Answers to Narcissistic Teachings on Spirituality with Dr. J.D. Mills.
All right, we back at it again, guys. Here we are. Joshua Mills once again signing in. I think I got a pretty good topic I want to talk about tonight. So we're talking about the art or the lost art of vulnerability and transparency. And those of you who follow me on Facebook, you guys heard me talk about that I was going to be doing this podcast in particular because I feel and I see that there's a loss in information, right? The space and position of how we flow and how we see things and how we perceive things determines the depth of how we really maneuver in life. And so my hopes in having this conversation is that we can take from it that there is a blessing in transparency and there's a blessing in vulnerability. I want to start out by saying that transparency and vulnerability and even humility is not a sign of weakness. It's not a sign of flowing within a space of being controlled or being in lack, right? It's really more so, when I think about it, it's more so controlled strength. It's more so a person who understands who they are, what they are, and is comfortable within the reality of their imagery of who they are, how they see themselves first, and also the space and how they've projected to other people the mentality that they've allowed other people to see them in, the viewpoint, right? So within that, there's something to be learned from that, you know? And I think a lot of times, especially when it comes to the church, it comes to ministry and different things as we see it and as we understand it, we kind of tend to be quiet, right? We don't really say too much. We really aren't open. And I think that's an interesting concept, because when you look at scripture, one of the main commandments that was given to the disciples when Jesus had resurrected, one of the things he told them, he said, "Go ye out into the uttermost parts of the earth and make disciples of all men." And this discipleship concept of being disciplined ones, the vessel that we walk in or we're carried in through this discipline, that space was founded, and the way it was established was more so kind of like an apprenticeship type of deal. Like we look at Jesus' disciples, right? And we see how they lived with him. They lived together, they ate together, they fellowshiped together, they did everything together. And so there was a level of vulnerability and transparency that Jesus had with his disciples, the 12 disciples, and then a whole nother layer as it related to the space of his inner three. And so there are layers to vulnerability and layers to transparency. I want to make that clear as we're having this discussion. But I think one of the major things that we've missed as it relates to the concept of walking out this call or walking out as a representative of God, we've forgotten the ability that we have by sharing our story. We've forgotten the place of the testimony that comes from us and the message that we send across to people by sharing our stories, by being vulnerable, by being in that stage. And so one of the things I've been noted to say is the greatest secret society in the earth right now is not the Illuminati or Skull and Crossbones and all these different fraternities and different things. The greatest secret society that's in the earth that I see thus far is the church. We literally practice silence. We'll read from a certain context. We'll teach from a certain context based upon a principle of how we were taught to see a certain thing in Scripture. But the place of vulnerability, of transparency, it's almost as though it's something that we totally ignore. But we talk about discipleship. We want to make disciples. We want to make disciples. We want to help people. The greatest message that I've ever shared with people that I've realized in my life is my story. It's not about me preaching them a word or giving them what the Bible says. It's the moments that I take what's off the page and I apply it through the lens of how I'm now looking into my life through self-awareness, through the eyes of self-awareness, where I begin to look and I begin to see how certain things correlate to the Scripture. But it's the most powerful part about it is my story tells the story of one that overcame, that was resilient, that stood, and that inspires other people. And I think a lot of times when we deal with this, and listen, let me say this is not an indictment against anybody, because there's different people out there, and I'm not saying so inclusively that everybody's not being vulnerable and everybody's not being transparent. That's not my point in bringing this up. But I believe that there is a space that once we come to a place within self that we're comfortable with ourselves, that we're no longer ashamed of who we are or who we used to be, that we've learned to be, that there's a space that we can begin to speak from and begin to articulate that can help people see, you know what, I'm not as far off as I thought I was. And I think that that's part of the issue with some of this leadership that we see. You really don't see the vulnerability. Maybe the people that started out with them saw levels of vulnerability, but later on, it was as though I needed to separate myself from the people. And, you know, I understand within certain situations and categories, but there's a level and a space that when I'm okay with me and I'm okay with my story, that there cannot be any shame that's brought upon me because I don't see myself as shameful. I'm in the space and the mindset that my process has been my process, and I'm growing and I'm still evolving. I'm still becoming. I haven't arrived yet, right? So understanding that process, what it does is it literally gives people the place to either they're going to show grace or they're going to come against me. But at any rate, because I'm solid within me, I'm not concerned about that. You know, I've been noted to say to some of those of you guys that follow me, it's not my business what you think of me. But at the end of the day, truly, it's about how I see me, right? And based upon how I see me, it will determine what layer or what level of transparency and vulnerability that I'm willing to be. So my hopes in talking about this is that we can begin to open the conversation up and come into a place that we begin to understand and see that there's a place and a position that as we begin to be vulnerable, that we literally make it okay for people to walk out their process. And in that space, we are no longer be in a space, in a position that it seems as though we're so arrived that we've made it. They got it. And this person's just struggling, trying to get there, just trying to make it in. But we make it so clear that this is a process and this is a journey. And part of that process is us literally just learning to enjoy the process and enjoy the journey step by step. I talked to somebody today. I was at the service Sunday, and I was talking to them, and I was sharing with them. They asked me, I feel like I'm trying to catch up in my life. And when the person came up and asked me, they was talking to me or whatever, immediately when they said that to me, I literally thought back to where I was at. Like I used to feel as though my life did not measure up to what I was portraying and flowing in as it relates to spiritual giftings and different things of that sort. I feel like I was always playing catch up. I wanted to play catch up. I had to play catch up. I had to get my life to get to a place so it looks like my spiritual walk, right? Because image matters, right? In my mind during that time, I was in that space, but I shared with them because of my experience. I shared with them, I said, listen, you got to learn how to be patient with yourself. You got to learn how to enjoy the journey. That's part of it, because the reality of it is your walk with God, the reality of that space is He loves you already. He's already chosen you already. In spite of you being imperfect, you've already been chosen. You've already been loved. And there's nothing you can ever do to change that factor. And then as it relates to your natural life, it's all about what you're willing to do to see different results. So if you're willing to put in the work to begin to walk in a certain space to see certain results, then you'll get those results. So in this particular case, the young man, he was telling me about all the great things that were happening and things that they were working on and things that they were doing. And I told him, I said, well, why do you feel like you're lacking something? If you're moving towards a certain direction and you're taking those steps and you're making those plans to begin to flow in that, then what is it that says to you that it's not enough? Whenever you find out what that thing is, then you put it in its place and you learn to enjoy the journey. So I said all this to say, just to talk about this process I'm in. I'm in a process right now. For those of you who don't know, and one of the things I stand by, I tell people, I said, listen, if I'm not going to allow nobody else to tell my truth, I'll tell my own truth first. If I tell my truth, then nobody else can tell it for me. So this is what I'm going to use this podcast for. I'm going to talk about, and I'll bring out, understandings of scripture and different things as time goes along. But I want to chart my process of healing, my process of going through. And so for those of you who don't know, I was married for 8 years. And I was married to a good woman. She was an amazing woman. She was a great person. I had a situation where the truth of the matter was it was infidelity that was involved, right? That's just a plain simple. And for those of you who don't understand how marriage works and understand about betrayal, because that's what it really is, infidelity, adultery, it really just falls into the category of betrayal. And I learned this because I went to counseling. We went to counseling, marriage counseling for it. And so in the counseling session, one of the things that really kind of messed me up, because I was still just thinking everything was my fault and trying to be a good Christian husband, right? Taking on the responsibility of everything and all these different things. And the counselor told us betrayal can happen years or moments before the physicality of the betrayal that takes place, whether it be on the male side or the woman's side. And I was just like, wow, I didn't even think about that. And it caused me to think back on to some of the things that we went through. And so one of the things that I'm not going to do, period, you guys will never hear me do, is badmouth anybody. I will only talk about me during this process. And so this thing went on. I realized that was a major thing for my wife. And no matter how much we tried to go through a process of healing and counseling and me moving a certain type of way, walking a certain type of way, over communicating different things, it just didn't work. It didn't work. And the other thing about that was, I love my children. I have two beautiful children that came out of the situation, and I love my daughters. And for those of you who don't know, my story is like really deep, and I have to unpack it one day. But my father, I didn't know my father until I was 19. I located him when I was 19. So because of that reason, in my mind, I was like, man, I'm gonna make this marriage work. I'm gonna make it work. I'm gonna make it work. Even when there were signs of it not being able to pull through, I still try to force things and try to force it to make it work. I'm gonna make this work, because I had the whole thing about, man, I'm not gonna be a statistic. I'm gonna break the cycles in my family, this divorce stuff and all this stuff. I had all that stuff in my mind, and it sounded good. It sounded great, and I was like, God said this and God said that, and doing all this. Oh my God, it was just all over the place. I was all over the place, and the truth of the matter was, I wasn't in control. I wasn't in control because there were certain things that were working inside of me in my life that I was not aware of. Against popular belief, the first 7 years of our life, we learned, we're sponges, and we just absorb everything. So how people handle stress, how they handle anxiety, how they handle fear, how they handle rejection, all these different things are learned in the first 7 years. Learn behavior. And so there are certain things that when I look back at my life and I look back at my marriage, there was things, as much as I love God and as much as God spoke and said, oh, this is who I have for you and this is the perfect situation for you, blah, 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 blah. The reality of it is I wasn't showing up as Joshua. I was showing up as every character that I had learned to be my entire life. And it's an interesting thing to think you're in control, but you find out that you're not. So there was learned behaviors, and then I overcompensated with church and ministry because that was what you're supposed to do, right? That's what you're supposed to do. So when it came down to just taking care of business and doing certain things, even my priorities, just to be quite honest, my priorities were moving and doing certain things, even as it relates to work and career path. I look back at it and I'm like, I struggled my entire marriage. I struggled with trying to just land a job and land a situation. And everybody sees me and they like, man, oh man, Prophet Josh, you're so powerful, you're so this, you're so that. And the truth of the matter is I didn't see myself as that. I didn't see any of those things. No matter how much God used me, no matter how many prophecies I gave and all these different things in that process, the truth of the matter is I was dealing with depression. My mother was diagnosed as a manic depressant when I think I was around the age of 10. So I'm still mirroring the things that I saw, the depression weighed so heavy in my family, different things. So I would go into my stuff and it was like I was expecting for my wife to understand that and then heal me of that, but it was not her place. And so I put more responsibility, I put more onto her than what was fair. There's times I didn't like the person I saw. Just be quite honest with you guys. There was times I looked in the mirror and I couldn't just stare at the mirror, because when I looked in the mirror, I couldn't see anything that was worth anything. Still prophesying, still playing keys in the church and making people shout, making people feel good, but couldn't stand my own self. Had no drive, had no desire for anything else, because this was what was expected of me, right? I remember being 16 years old, being a musician in the church, and I was very gifted and flowing. 16, 17, 18. My junior year, I ended up dropping out of high school and getting my GED, and I went to college. I went to a trade school and learn how to weld and different things like that, trying to get a trade of different things. I'm saying all this is because everybody that was around me, my family members outside my mother, because my mother had moved, but the family members I was living with, nobody said to me, Joshua, you could do greater. You don't just have to get a trade. You can go to school. You can do these things. You can do that and accomplish this and different things. And so everything in my life was me feeling the neglect, the rejection, the abandonment from my father, starting from my father. And then there was things that happened with my mother. My mother was trying to search for herself and different things and trying to find out her process and everything. I'm older now, so I understand that she was still growing, even though she was my mother. Like, she was still growing into a person, trying to grow and figure this thing called life out. And so, in the midst of all that process, there was things that happened, and it fed right back into the trigger of abandonment, rejection, all these different things. So I brought all this stuff, all this bags. Like, if you can imagine someone coming to visit you, say, I'm coming to visit you for a weekend, but have like all their luggage with them. Like, that's what I brought to my relationship. I brought all this brokenness. Still love God. Still love my wife. But the love that I understood was not enough. It wasn't right. And so we bumped heads. And, she's a great mother. I love her, she's an amazing woman. And I wouldn't change it for the world, because I learned so much from that space. I learned so much about me in a relationship. And here's just a little quick nugget for those of you who are in relationships or looking to go into a relationship. You got to understand that when you get into a relationship, you get into a marriage, a mirror goes up, and you literally begin to see yourself. Even though you think you're seeing the other person, you're pointing your finger at that person. Like, you're doing this wrong, you're doing that wrong. But the truth of the matter is, you're seeing you because you don't like what this person is doing to you. But the problem is a lot of times we're so out of tune with self-awareness and self-reflection that we don't take time to think about, why do I not like when this person does this to me? Where does this come from? Where does this space is? And if this person is still processing their life and understanding who they are, then the truth of the matter is, how I respond and how I react has nothing to do with that person. It has everything to do with me. It has everything to do with how I see things, how I perceive things. I think one of the greatest quotes up to date that I've heard was Reverend Ike said, when people mistreat me, I don't ask myself, why do they mistreat me? I ask myself, why did I teach them to mistreat me? When he said that, I was like, whoa, that's crazy. But it's the truth. However people treat you, however people do things in their process of life and interacting with people, it's never about what the other person does. It's really about how you perceive it and how you move from that space, right? Teachable moment. So going through that process, and one of the things that I learned during those developmental years, my mother was searching, and so she would jump out of a relationship to another relationship. She'd get in another relationship, and I don't think that there's ever really been a time in my developmental years that I can remember my mom just being single. She always had somebody she was entertaining, and that's not nothing negative against her, because heck, most of us still do that now. We do it to this day, but that was something that was subconsciously learned that I was not aware of. And so instead of me giving myself time and process after going through this process of the divorce and everything, even before the divorce was even finalized, here I am talking and engaging, get into a relationship with another person, and I'm jumping into something else. And, it could seem like it was, this is God doing this. But something I had to take a moment and pull back and think about. And that was simply this. when God speaks concerning something in your life, it does not negate practical wisdom. I'm going to say it again. When God says something, when God is doing something in your life and he speaks something to you, he reveals something to you, it does not negate practicality of wisdom. And wisdom says, you need to be healed, Josh. Wisdom says you need to go sit on somebody's couch and talk to a therapist, because there's some things in you that you don't even know and you're not aware of. I mean, even down to how I'm looking at my life and I'm saying, like, man, certain people would think that, oh no, you good, and there's ain't nothing wrong with that. But I don't like the way that, and it's just talking about me, I can only talk about me. I don't like the way I respond to people when I get upset with them. Like, it's one thing to be dealing with somebody who's approaching you a certain way, that's coming against you, but you're in a situation with somebody who say they love you and they're sharing something with you, and because you don't like what they're saying or didn't like the way they brought it to you, you get upset, and then you're raising your voice and you moving to something. I don't like that about myself, and I'm like, man, I got to work on that. That's not okay, because I'm not trying to keep praying for everybody else and preaching and prophesying, but bleed on the person I love, bleed on the people I love. I got to a place, man, I just moved and I saw how my daughters were affected. I love my daughters, man. I love them so much, but I have to love them enough to use wisdom in how I maneuver even in my life. Because one thing I said, that's so crazy. Wow. One of the things I said to my mom when I was about 9 years old, 10 years old, I'm just surprised my mom didn't smack me in my mouth. But I said to her, I said, Mom, what you do affects us, because we kind of grew up in a time from the South. We used to hear, do as I say, not as I do. That's what the parents used to say. Do as I say, not as I do, right? And so just the space of that, I remember telling my mom, I was like, Mom, no. Because I think if I recall correctly, I had a conversation. And I love my mom because of this reason. My mom always talked to us. She always, no matter what age, she always tried to communicate with us. One because she didn't really get that when she was younger, and so she always made it her business to make sure that she communicated with us and everything. And so I don't know how the conversation went, but I remember in this conversation she was just like, what I do don't affect y'all. It don't, I could do what I want to do because I'm grown, or something like that, something along the lines of that. But I recall at 10 years old telling my mom, I said, no, Mom, what you do does affect us. And I'm 10 years old telling my mom that. I'm surprised she didn't smack me in my mouth, like, pop. But here it is, I'm in my 30s, and I forget that. I forget that when my mom was my age, I'm telling my mom this stuff. Do y'all hear me? I'm telling my mom this, and now here it is. I'm her age, in her age range, and I'm moving that same way. Man, I got some change to do. I got some growth to do. And I'm grateful that my children really love me unconditionally, because in spite of them, their little hearts being hurt, they didn't understand what the pain was or what they were feeling. They just knew they didn't like what was going on. And I talked to their mother, and I was like, what'd she say to you, my Victoria, my oldest? And she was like, oh, she didn't like such and such and such and such. And she felt this way. And it dawned upon me what she was saying was so true, because I had just took a parenting class that literally talked about the emotional state of children when you're going through separation and divorce. And I literally took everything in me not to cry, because here it is, I'm doing the very thing that I don't want to do to the people I love. I need change. I'm sharing all this with you because I think it's necessary for you to understand vulnerability and understand transparency. That if you tell your own story, nobody else can tell it. But there is so much fruit and so much life in you telling your story. And so I hope that as we go on this journey, that we're able to take from it and take a lesson from that space and begin to do our own self-reflection, do our own introspective and retrospective look into our lives, and begin to see what's really going on. Not just live in the plane that you're oblivious, but actually be intentional with your life. I think that there's something to that. And so I'm going to be sharing this process. And so we'll pick up where we left off. We're running out of time. I'll be back on next week to finish up. It's not going to be much finishing up, but it's going to be this process. And so I'm asking you guys to go with me on this process. I am right now going to use this also as an opportunity for accountability as well with you all, my listeners. And so I'm going to be I'm in the process right now of looking for a therapist. And so this is a kind of a call out to anybody who's in the area, maybe in Georgia or whatever. If you know some good therapists, let me know. But I'm looking for therapy. I need to do that as a minister of God, someone who loves God, someone who loves God's people, but still broken, still needs that mending, that space. I pray that my transparency, my vulnerability becomes strength for you, because this story that I'm sharing with you, this life is my living epistle. This is me living. So I appreciate you guys listening. And I'll see you guys next week. All right? Talk to you soon.